Welcome to TomYoung.net. I have 3 Ferrari engines here at the shop that spans from a 2-cam 3-liter engine all the way up to a 4-cam 4.4-liter engine. And I thought it would be a nice chance for us to see the differences. So 2 of these engines I rebuilt for their customers going into cars that were being restored or worked on. And the third one, which is this 4-cam engine, came out of the car because it had a bearing issue on the chain tensioner. There's a bearing that's starting to go bad and making a lot of noise. Unfortunately, the access to this bearing is really kind of difficult and requires that the engine come out. Not a big expensive part, but just time and labor to do that. It's one of those unfortunate pitfalls about Ferrari. The other engines are, this is a 330 engine, and it was rebuilt and waiting to go into the car. And this one is a 250. So let's start with the 250 engine. This engine is basically the engine that everybody knows that goes into a 250 GTO or a 250 short wheelbase and a 250 Lusso. 250 being the displacement of the cylinder times 12 equals 4 liters. So when you hear the 250 GTO, 250 short wheelbase, they basically mean that this engine is the displacement of a 3-liter V12. And architecturally, it's the same engine. This one comes out of a 2+2, but when you pop the hood of a GTO, the basic layout of the engine is the same. They have more carburation, they have different camshafts, a couple of, the plumbing is a little bit different, but the engine itself that's kind of what you see when you open the hood. So it's kind of neat that this engine is a very iconic and very competitive engine for its day. Stock form of this, probably 240 horsepower. Doesn't sound like a lot. It's gross numbers as well, but at the same time, that was pretty sophisticated back in the early 60s. So that's the 250. Moving on over to the 330 engine, which is a larger block, and it's a 4-liter engine. So they expanded, enlarged the displacement of this engine, but it's still basically a 2-cam setup. Has the same layout with the plugs on the outside. 3 carburetors. This one also comes out of a 2+2. They changed, a few things on the water passages. I think if we wanted to compare 250, as an engine spotter, some of the easiest ways to spot the difference between a 250 engine and a 330 is the top pulley on the 250 engine. They always have this idler setup. It's not a water pump. It's just a idler gear that comes off the top, and that's on the 250 engines. The 330 loses that and has very typical what you would see like a water neck for the coolant. So very easy spotter. Like if you're at a show or you see an engine, that's a big giveaway as to the difference between the 330 and the 250. Bunch of other little things. On the 250 engine, the water passages off the heads, they did them externally. So they have this water pipe that comes off the back of the head, kind of goes underneath the exhaust header, comes across, and then goes to a water stand or water pipe stand. And then the same thing on the front of the head. There's a little Y pipe that comes off. On the 330s, what they did was they made a lot of that water pipes. You can see that hobo down there, comes up, goes through the timing chest. They made all those water passages internal, and made it a little bit more integrated to the casting of the block. The other changes were that the water pumps have changed a little bit. In fact, even though this is a 330 engine, not all 330s are the same. The water pumps changed because what Ferrari did was, because they had their own foundry, they could very easily make changes on these engines from one model or even one engine to the next. So there were running changes that were made, and you'll see changes in castings. So you just gotta, when you're buying parts and gaskets and parts for, replaceable parts, even like water pump seals and bearings, you have to make sure that you measure everything, because you have to make sure which one you have, because there's several different versions, and depending on when the engine was built. For instance, this 330 engine has two different oil filters, because this one is what I would call an early 330, and it has a bypass filter. So it has two oil filters, but one of them is your standard flow, and then the other one is a bypass type filter. Same thing as the 250. But just because I know the 330s, later 330s went to two of the same ordinary filters, and they would go side by side. So if you had a 330 and you ordered two filters because you thought that all the 330s had the same filters, no, early 330s had two different type of filters, but you just had to know that, or at least notice it on the car. So when we move on to the 365 engine, you can see they went to two of the same filters, but they've been doing that for a little while, from 330s to 365 2-cam. The biggest difference here we have is it's a 4-cam engine. Now I apologize, the engine's a little dirty, just came out of the car, I haven't had a chance to clean it, but it wasn't rebuilt, and it's just kind of a little, a lot of road grime and a little bit of grease, but at least you're getting a chance to see, the full 4-cam layout of this particular engine. So what they did was they had a 365 displacement 4.4 liter V12 that looked very similar to these 2-cam engines with the valve cover like that. But what they did was they were developing a 4-cam engine. In fact, Ferrari was doing it a little earlier with the 275. They came out with the first 4-cam engine. But by the time the 365 GTB4, which is 4.4, they had continued to make the 4-cam engine. So 365, there is a 2-cam 4.4 liter V12, but this is the 365 or 4.4 liter 4-cam engine. So as you can see, the cam covers are very different because of the 4-cam layout. A lot of differences in the way this engine is put together. It has a a 2-mount design, and as we go back here, the 330s were the first time when you look at 2-mount. This was a 4-mount 330 engine. So again, like I said, there are 330 engines with 2 mounts. There are 330 engines with 4 mounts. The first Ferrari engine has, the 250 had the 4-mount, basically has these 4 engine mounts. Same thing here with the 330, but by the time they got here, they decided to go with 2-mount. There's talk about the fact that there was vibration issues with these 4 mounts, and to isolate the engine, they put this big rubber donut to isolate the engine a little bit. Also, by this time, they had gone to transaxles, and so there's even more isolation, where the engine and transmission were basically isolated from the rest of the chassis. The other thing I wanted to go over very quickly, because a lot of people these days want to know about internal numbers. So when Ferrari does serial numbers, they want to look at engine numbers here, which want to match with serial numbers. I'll probably do a video in the future about getting where all the other serial numbers are, but just so you can see, that's an internal number, and then that's the serial number on the car, or the serial number on the engine, supposed to be matching to from engine and chassis, should be matching to that number. However, what Ferrari did was, when they were building these engines, they didn't know which engine these cars or these engines were going to go into. They just basically built one after another. You got to imagine like having a 250 engine. You had a factory that built like 100 or 200 or 50 of them, and was that one going to go in a short wheelbase? Was that one going to go in a GTO? Was that one going to go into a GTE? They didn't know. If they were spec the same, for instance, a GT engine had the same output as a Lusso or anything like that. So they were just building the engines. Well, how do they keep track of them? Well, they had an internal number that they stamped on the engine so that they could keep track of what was going on with that engine. What the dyno number was, how it performed, whether or not they did all the clearances and checks and all this other stuff. And then they would just have rows and rows. In fact, there's some pictures of rows of Ferrari engines at the Ferrari factory back in the 60s where they were just all lined up waiting to be installed into a car. Well, once the assembly line had a car ready and it needed an engine, they pulled one of these engines and they put it in that particular chassis. When they put the car in, or the engine in the car, they stamped the number on they said, okay, well, here's the chassis number, so let's stamp, we'll mate this particular engine with that chassis and we'll take a note of it. So then therefore they would take the internal number and correlate that with that. Okay, well, this particular car gets 1324 and 1324 now is married to this serial number in their records. So when this whole Class CK certification process that Ferrari is trying to do to see, do you have the original engine? You submit these numbers to Ferrari and they will go and look up in their notes, which sometimes is as simple as just little pencil notated, notes in their archives, and they will tell you whether or not that particular number went together. It's either certified or as it was left the factory, or it didn't. So when people talk about internal numbers, that's what they're looking for. On an engine, there are some other numbers, but the main numbers they're looking for are those internal numbers. They're also looking for the same thing. Transaxles or transmissions, same thing. They had dozens and dozens of transmissions. And when that transmission was installed, they said, okay, this particular transmission was put in with that particular chassis number. This particular rear end was put into, or differential was put into the car. So that's another side of it. What gets interesting is by the time the Daytona engines or 365 4-cam engines came out, they stopped correlating those numbers. So what we have is we no longer have a number on even where the engine is supposed to be, or the engine is supposed to match the chassis, is no longer correlated. So there are still internal numbers and there are still stamps on these bosses, but these do not match the serial number of the car. So the only people that can tell you, because look, if I got, now understandably there are people who nefariously restamp these engines, but if I look at this number, this is supposed to match the chassis. So if I look at this number and I go to the chassis, it should be what they call a matching number car. However, when you get to this era of car, no longer matching. So just a regular guy can't look at this number because this number makes no sense to the chassis, doesn't match anything. The only way you know is if look at record keeping, or you can go to the Ferrari factory and ask them. They won't share that information necessarily with you, but at the same time, the only people that would be able to say definitively this particular engine was installed in this particular car because these numbers and our records match. But it's not so easy for the rest of us to do it. Earlier cars like this, a little bit easier. Yes, you can scrape these numbers off. Yes, you can restamp them. Yes, you can copy them. But what ends up happening is if you do that, first, not only is it illegal, but also the fact is it will not correlate with that number, because the only people that really have those nodes is the factory. So you can go ahead and change that number, but if you ever go back to the factory and say, hey, they're going to say, we have a problem. So it's just another little tidbit of information for what they call numbers matching in the Ferrari world. So here's the, just interesting to see 3 engines sitting here with differences. And, let me know what you think. If you want to see any differences or any other things that you're curious or you like what you see, let me know. And, if I have time, I'd be happy to share some more information with you. Thanks for watching.